to introduce myself. Stoner Story Witch.
If we could return to being in kinship with the plant world, more consistently across the world, we would be able to access different tools and skills and strategies for surviving collapse, but we would also be accessing tools and skills and strategies for imagining a different world.
Right. Hello and welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast. My name is Kristen. I am so grateful to be recording, editing, and publishing this podcast on the lands of the Chorotega people, colonially known as Costa Rica. My friends, I am so excited for today's episode. Today's episode marks, in my mind anyway, the 1 year anniversary of the Stoner Story Witch podcast. And I can hardly even believe it. I am setting this episode to publish on the summer solstice, which last year was my season 1, episode 1, which was Secure Attachment and the Male Gaze in Little Women. But anyway, to mark this event, I have a very special guest on the podcast, a dear friend of mine, Kirsten, who is really, in my mind, a huge part of like the stoner story witch archetype, at least how it works in my brain. And so I was so delighted that she was willing to come onto the podcast to talk more about fleshing out this idea of like, what is it, like, what does it mean to actually, have that label of stoner? What are other ways that we can look at ourselves when we have, intimate relationships with the plant world? As I was editing this, I noticed that there was a deep desire in me to talk more about the Persephone character from Hadestown and how that informed a lot of this stoner story witch archetype, as well as the theme song, which if you did not already notice, I've altered for this second year, or I've added to it rather, for this second year of the podcast. And I realized that I want that to be a different podcast episode. So my apologies if there's a couple moments in this episode that might feel a little bit choppy, or maybe it's like we're alluding to something and maybe it's like, wait, what did you guys really talk about that? I'm confused. I am sorry. That will be coming out in a future episode here shortly, where I will be actually I want to provide some special time to discuss the song of this podcast. I know before this podcast aired, I did what's in a name, and kind of talked a little bit about the Stoner Story Witch and what was feeling juicy to say about it. And what I really want to do, I know today's episode is kind of diving into the stoner part, a deep dive into kind of the plant allyship, plant medicine component of the Stoner Story Witch. But I really am feeling called also to talk a little bit about the song itself and the music and the sound that is, to me, very intentional in this podcast. And I don't know that I've actually given it any time to really talk about. So I just want to name, there are some parts of this conversation that I have cut from this episode, and I'm hoping to share in a future episode. And my apologies if it might cause some sort of like confusion or clunkiness in you, dear listener. So I met Kirsten a few years ago on the Numinous Network with Carmen Spaniola, and I will definitely link to that in the show notes. As always, we have a very rich conversation. I will do my best to include any references that we made to relevant links that you can check out in the show notes. So yeah, Kirsten and I talk a little bit about collapse in this episode, and for that, I just want to refer you to the Numinous Network with Carmen Spagnola, as well as I'll put a link in the show notes to Collapse in a Nutshell, which is a podcast of Carmen's on the Numinous podcast. So we just kind of name it, and if you are wanting more, check out Carmen's work. This podcast episode is a little light on the story, or I mean, we do talk about some stories kind of loosely, but I do just kind of want to say, I didn't mention this in my conversation with Kirsten, because it felt like a bit of a tangent, but now here in the intro, I think maybe I will just say that Kirsten does a really great job of talking about how patriarchy shows up in how the marijuana industry is treating the plants, that it is trying to maintain these plants in their bloom stage, kind of trying to arrest their development and only prioritizing one sliver of their life cycle for the purpose of what it can produce for us, for its reproductive potential. And it made me think, and I will try to link this in the show notes as best as I can, but a Friday Things newsletter that I got on May 30th by Stacey Lee Kong, that is Adriana Smith's story isn't just like The Handmaid's Tale. It's actually just like slavery. And I think that, it's easy for me to hear Kirsten tell this story of cannabis and how it is being cultivated in the world today. And for me, my mind immediately goes to, oh my gosh, it's like Handmaid's Tale. And which, for those of you who are not familiar with Handmaid's Tale, it is, the story of a, dystopian future, but actually let's also call the thing a thing. It's happening already. Where women are not in control of their bodies, where their bodies are being used to be producing offspring for the colony, for the people, and not in a way that they consent to, certainly. And anyway, this Friday Things post was all about how we are so quick to want to pull these stories that are centering white women in this fictitious world, rather than being like, hey, Handmaid's Tale was actually, if anything, inspired by the very real history and continued practice of not giving women of color, especially, autonomy over their own bodies, and all in service of some larger, white supremacist, imperialist, Christian nationalist, perhaps, narrative. So, I just kind of had to say some words about that. I am going to post to the Friday Things link so that you can fully read about this, but it's just that was not even a month ago that I got sent that, and then I'm just like, oh my gosh, these stories are also echoed in the plant world, and really it's just an invitation to be grappling, because we are living in collapse, and in these times there is no perfection, there's only trade-offs and invitations to grapple and opportunities to try to tap into some collective imagination of how can we birth something new, how can we collectively imagine a world that we would prefer as the old is collapsing around us. But yeah, I met Kirsten, the guest for today's pod, through the Numinous Network several years ago, and I was so delighted that she agreed to say yes to have, just a conversation around, plant allies and animism and spirituality, and how all of that can intersect in, the different positions we hold in these collapse times. And it was such a treat to chat with her, and I am so excited to be able to share it with the larger world here. So without any further ado, I think the rest of it speaks for itself. I will leave you. Here's my conversation with Kirsten. Welcome so much, Kirsten, to the Stoner Story Witch. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm noticing, even just as you say that my whole body just started shivering in that kind of good tingly way.
Oh, I'm really excited that you said yes. And I guess I would love to take a moment, if you wouldn't mind, for me to just ask, like, would you mind sharing, like, what made you say yes to coming on the show? Or perhaps put differently, like, why are you here?
What made me say yes? I think the yes to this show, to spending this time with you, really comes from a sense that having a conversation with you out loud for others to join in as listeners when they do, it just kind of feels like an extension of all the conversations we've had before in the time that we've known each other over the last few years as friends. And there has been an invitation in my life to develop a bit more of a public presence. And so I think there is a part of me that's saying yes, because the invitation came at a really good time where I was also starting to tip my toe into this idea of, like, what would happen if I started sharing out loud a little bit more what's going on inside here.
Yes, yes. I I'm excited that I get to be like an avenue for you to like be able to like dip your toe. That feels nice. Thank you for sharing. I just want to just like to introduce you to the podcast and to the listeners. I just want to ask if you'd mind sharing, what identities do you lead with, or like in what roles are you kind of wanting to highlight in your time here?
I love this question every time. Every time I hear others answer it, and every time I sort of imagine answering it myself. Certainly at the moment, an identity that I'm leading with is mother. I have two kids, and I'm raising them in Western Canada, what is colonially known as Victoria, BC, in the territories of the Wasanich First Nations people. And um, taking care of the day-to-day life is a big part of my world right now. I also am a full-time bureaucrat. I work for a large public institution, and there's just this reality that a lot of my life is taken up by working and mothering. And then for this podcast, and for the part of me that makes mothering and working possible, I would say sort of like maybe a garden witch would be the identity that I lead with. I am a renter on a small little acreage where, despite sort of not having any kind of long-term guarantee that I can stay here, I just have this compulsive need to garden and take care of the land. And so I grow a lot of plants, and plants grow me. And and yeah, so between those three aspects of my identity, they really are what's showing up front and center in my world right now.
I love that. Yeah, like the garden witch aspect of plants grow me. What are the practices that you have to connect with your most wild self, or like your most intuitive self?
It's hard right now to connect to those parts of me. And yet at the same time, I feel like they're constantly just under the surface, almost screaming to be let out. There's a lot of containment right now in the world. There's just with everything that's going on. Everything that we have visible to us online and just outside our front doors. There's definitely this strong feeling of unraveling and collapse energy happening all around. And I really noticed that there's a lot of tension in me between expressing and really living into my wild intuitive self and surviving under the current systems, naming those as patriarchy and colonialism and capitalism and extractivism and white supremacy and on and on. And so I think lately I've actually been trying to practice my intuitive wild self in really small ways everywhere and anywhere. Because I feel like even a few months ago, I might have answered that question as, oh, I go out into the garden, I go for a walk in nature, and I ask the more than human world for their generosity in offering me potentially like the wisdom of the moment, right? Like I'll walk outside and be like, okay, I'm really losing it here. I need to go out and get some support. I'll walk outside and I'll just sort of look around, and something is usually available to help ground me into that sort of more intuitive knowing. But what I'm noticing lately is that I actually need to access that a lot more when I'm just sitting in front of a screen at a desk or standing in line, in a space where I'm trying to access basic services. And so something that I've been doing a lot lately is just imagining myself holding a rock and holding a feather, and kind of this titration between being like as light as a feather and being able to kind of rise up and look at everything from a bird's eye view and see how it's all playing out in this wider, much longer story than the one that any of us are living in our lifetime. But then also this concept of a rock and kind of being smoothed over like a pebble by life, and sort of the fact that so much of the world is so out of our control. And this, that when I hold a rock, or I even just imagine, I don't even have one right now, but just imagining it, holding it in my hand, there's this feeling of like, I want to be moved like a pebble is moved at the edge of the shore. And I want to be responsive to the way I'm being moved, to allow it to shape me. And so I'm doing a lot of just imagining right now, because sometimes you can't get out into the forest. Sometimes you can't get out into the garden.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't have access to those things because of where you live or how life has required you to live. And so just sort of really trying to start practicing those minute moments of wildness, intuitiveness, even when the circumstances seem to want everything but that from you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you like named more and more. Just like access to the outdoors is a privilege, and it's only going to get worse. And so, of course, just like being outside is a great way to connect with our wild selves. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that is I feel like I'm gonna be carrying that one with me in moments. I've also lately, it's kind of a funny one. I've thought of holding a rock before in like a moment when I haven't had one, and like if I'm just feeling like really agitated, if like my kid just is, or whatever, just like, okay, it's just like I'll imagine like the weight of a rock. But I really love the feather too, so I'm kind of just thank you. It already feels so juicy. My next question is, what is a story or a character or an archetype or maybe a trope, but a story that has been a companion or guide of yours on your path of liberation?
I might go off on a little aside here, because I've always loved Kristen. It's actually just occurring we're Kirsten and Kristen on this call.
We are Kirsten and Kristen.
Ever since I encountered you, I've always loved your ability to access stories as sources of important teachings, information, archetypes. And it's not something that I have a lot of, I would say, like familiarity or regularity to. In lots of ways, nothing really comes to me to kind of access a story and the imagery and the energy of a story and place myself in it, or place that story around me in a way that's like, oh, that's the one. It's more like there's something about stories throughout my entire life that have actually, maybe more than anything, disturbed me. And as though there is something about the stories that's disingenuous or dishonest, that is not being presented to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the stories of the princess getting rescued by the prince, the stories of the witch in the woods who's evil, the stories of the snake who's the one who is giving the poison, you know, the stories of the spider being the one who is the malevolent force. And I think there's always just been something about me that recognizes or registers that something's off about all that. And actually, I just finished reading The Madonna Secret by Sophie Strand. Oh my. It was such a feeling of, you know, when you read something or you hear something and it's like someone took the inside contents of your brain that have always been jumbled and haven't been able to find words or make sense or put it out in a way that anyone else could possibly comprehend. And then you hear it and you're like, oh my, thank you so much. I have a couple of those actually. So maybe that's where I could go with this. And this Madonna Secret book by Sophie Strand was one of them, because of what it really does is it explores the life and times of Galilee and sort of the area from which Abrahamic and monotheistic religions come from. And it twists the perspective towards what would it have been like for, you know, women and mothers at that time to be connected to the land and connected to the belonging and the safety and the completeness of life lived in relationship with the land, and kind of contradict it against the rise of these monotheistic, Abrahamic, patriarchal, religious sort of movements of the time, you know, being around the time that Jesus was alive, for, you know, just for the audience's reference here. And so, yeah, that story is a really good example for me of how I've never been able to buy into the story that Christianity sells, that sort of like mainstream Christianity sells. There's always been just like something about me that's like, I don't get it. And I don't get how so many other people seem to get it. I just don't get it. Right. Yeah. And so that's how it is for me with a lot of the stories of our world in these times. And then, you know, you open up onto this concept of like, well, what if the story has been skewed all along to a certain agenda?
Yes.
And I think that's the part of the story I'm interested in.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I we could talk about just the Madonna Secret for over an hour, probably. What I really loved about it, though, I loved that. I mean, so much of, like Yeshua, like the historical Jesus, is like a lot of his work was really through his partnership with his wife, Mary Magdalene, or Miriam in the book, and how she just continually, like they met and kind of fell in love at the river. And you know, like they're just he's going around and he's like telling his stories and he's gaining a following, and all the disciples are all men, are like really wanting him to, like, you know, grow his following. And she just keeps pleading with him, we need to go back to the river. We need to go back to the river. We need to go back to the river. And that it's ultimately, I mean, the way it's written is, you know, like he doesn't listen to her, and he gets
caught up in the dominant.
Yes. It's
force.
Like patriarchy, like patriarchy and imperialism are the villains, right? And
you were saying how Miriam and the sort of earth-oriented wisdom in her kept asking Yeshua or Jesus, let's go back to the land. Let's go back to the forest. That's where the kingdom is.
Yes.
And it just kind of clicked for me as you said that, this concept of kin, and how it's through our kin and our interbeing and our interrelating with the kin around us, including the plants, which I know is partly what we want to get into here. It's through our interrelating with our kin that is what creates the power and the healing and the the belonging and the safety and the collective liberation is through through that kinship. And even as you say that, and you and I have done this before, where I kind of riff on words, like kin are the first three letters of the kingdom. Where it has gone over the last 2,000 years has been to sort of rip that piece out of it into hyperindividuality and competitiveness and colonial sort of, what's the word I want to look for here? Like theft. So yeah, that I just riffing a little bit on what you were saying there, just kind of occurs to me how maybe so many of the stories that we are fed are about creating these friction, tension, us and them energies between characters. And I'm really interested in the synergy and alchemy of what happens when we look, more broadly at how things are interacting with each other.
I mean, the last question that I have just for the intro is, but maybe it'll segue us, is how do you resource yourself for liberation, like yours and the collective?
There's some tears and sort of some tenderness that is arising in me as you ask that question. And a big part of what's coming to me is how I desperately want to raise children who love the world. Just this overwhelming concern about the world, and in particular people who are marginalized, and environments and other species other than humans that are marginalized and harmed in the world right now. And I don't know, it was probably somewhere online that I saw, I think it was Naomi Klein was talking about how like these sort of, I think of them as like mad man babies of our world. These mad man babies in the world, I won't even name them here, but we all know who they are right now, or these mad man babies of the world. It's so obvious, at least to me, that it feels like they've given up on loving the world. And so their solution is to just bring the hate and bring the fear and bring the dominance. And to me, that's a profound abandonment of the world. And so more and more, I think, at least from where I sit in my positions of whiteness and privilege and relative safety from where I live in the world, I think of collective liberation as safety for the world, for the living and sort of systems and people of the world. And I think of collective liberation as like a return to love and a return to kinship with each other. And right away, just the thing that resources me when I feel like all of that is way too much, like how can I even possibly make a dent in it? And even sort of some of the self-doubt and the guilt and the shame that comes from knowing that there's nothing I could do that would ever be enough.
Right.
To raise children who see the world with awe and wonder and love, who can notice the beauty of, a dandelion growing out of the crack in the sidewalk. That feels like the thing that I can do. And kind of becomes like the thing I would, if I'm feeling dysregulated and I'm feeling disconnected from my empowerment, if I'm feeling just complete despair, it's like, okay, well, what can I do today to help my children love the world?
Oh, yeah. I just want to reflect that, in the time that we've spent in most of our friendship has been virtual, but we have actually been in shared physical space. And I just remember one of the things that that really like drew me to you and felt, maybe a little bit foreign to me was your like enchantment with the world, just how accessible it is to be like communing with the more than human, to be in relationship with the more than human and the plants and all of that. And like me just being so like blown away at your readiness to be enchanted and to be in love with the world, and like seeing that as like a thing that I wanted to develop in myself, and recognizing, just as you saying, like I want to you want to keep that for your kids. And so I'm just, yeah, just I think I'm feeling a little tenderness of just, I think that like that is actually the default programming, and it gets taught and conditioned out of us. And so like tenderness for like, oh, how maybe that part of me wasn't necessarily fed. And so
Oh,
I'm just like so grateful that you're raising your kids to be in love with the world. Like that's like, and I just, that's beautiful. There's so many different conversations that we could have, but one that I was really looking to have a conversation about plants and like kind of the more than human world, plant medicines, especially with like the title of this podcast being Stoner Story Witch. And I could talk a little bit about, you know, how use of cannabis has really helped me in finding the cracks in the wall in stories, in having like integrative journaling sessions, or kind of making more of an animist turn, or helping me in trance journeys. Like there's been different ways that it's been like a spiritual amplifier for me. And I think I just really wanted to have a conversation with somebody that we could almost give, you know, hemp or cannabis or whatever, like a little bit of the spotlight of just like who, like, what's your relationship with them? Like, what have they taught you? What are like, how are they dealing with collapse? You know? Uh, yeah, just if we, and I think like, I think I'm also just, yeah, curious if there's any part of just your relationship with any plant ally that you have that just would feel sweet to share. I think just kind of have like some like co-companioning and witnessing around like who are some of your plant buds, and yeah, what do they have to say?
Oh, plants. Oh, yes. Thank you.
And mushrooms. I can also, you know, I know I kind of say that, but we can also include mushrooms if you want to talk about them at any point.
I noticed that as you invite me to speak about sort of relating to and being in relationship with plants and plant medicines, I'm almost already in a trance state of just like, I got lots of grinning happening at the edges of my cheeks. It's just like, oh, hallow be thy beautiful plants, you know, like
Oh,
the plant world is so magical and amazing. And one of the things that really switched for me how I relate to the plant world, I've been gardening since about 2005. Started my first little mini garden plot on a rental that I had in my 20s when I was finishing up university. And since then, my whole life has transformed so that, you know, the person I imagined myself being when I was young, like, is so far off where I've ended up being. And plants have really, really, I think, helped me come into myself, helped me uh, really deepen into my existence, my sense of humanity, and my sense of sort of selfness. And that really did start for me, you know, in the last, I don't know, 10 or so years. And what really switched things for me was this concept of how everything alive on this planet has been evolving together. It's so easy in the world that we live in to center the human species as
Yes.
being the most evolved, or the, you know, the wisest, or the, you know, we've got the most developed prefrontal cortex, and oh, we're so amazing and special. And that is true. Like, humans are a pretty complex, interesting species. But more and more, I actually find myself thinking of us as one of the least, the youngest. We're sort of like, I think of us as this sort of young
Yeah.
species. You know, you and I have shared some experiences to learn about the teachings of, you know, the four seasons, and, you know, the transition between sort of new life and childhood and adolescence and adult, and hopefully most of us throughout our lifetimes get this opportunity to move through these phases of our lives. And I think of humanity as kind of, in some ways, currently at least, our expression of the dominant kind of human experience is like adolescence, sort of this flailing species that is taking up so much destructive space. And I you know, as I say that, I want to be really careful to note that there are definitely peoples who are not, do not fit that description, right? But the sort of global expression of the human footprint on the planet right now is you know, it's pretty. Anyway, I won't get too into it. I digress. But I think, like, we humans evolved in relationship to the world around us, but so too did the world around us evolve as we were evolving. And so I often think of plants as having a certain type of agency to evolve with us. And plant allies, in particular those that have consciousness, to allow us to access information about the more than human world, about the sort of deeper, more interconnected versions of ourselves. That there's a mutual reciprocity and feedback loop there. And it's such a Western, Euro colonial, I think, concept to think that we use plant medicines, that we are consuming them and putting them into our bodies and gaining the experience from them. When what we're doing is we're relating to kin that have also evolved to benefit from our use of them. Right? When we consume plant medicines in safe, connected environments, or maybe not sometimes. I know there's a lot of, like, people out there who are, you know, probably struggling to use powerful plant medicines in safe ways. And, you know, again, it's always so hard to have these conversations without kind of telling the full story with such a short period of time. But I'm sure there are those of us who access powerful teachings when we weren't even trying to, right? But yeah, I think about plants as having agency. And, you know, when a plant, like, I just think about a berry, you know, a berry is actively making itself, like, a berry plant knows that the berries will get eaten if they taste sweet. And if they're eaten, they get stratified, they get released by birds and bears and others throughout the landscape so that those plants can grow again. And so I just think of the plant world as being such an incredible teacher and so deserving of our very thoughtful attention. And a lot of that happened for me by just spending a lot of time with plants, including ingesting them over the years in working with cannabis and psilocybin in particular, but also like strawberry and nettle and sunflower and mint. It's almost as though by convening and connecting into this community, I found my church. And I've pulled parts of me forward that I think got buried, like possibly even before I was born.
Yeah. I love, I like, I feel like I'm hearing parts of me that were buried since before I was born. You found your church. Those things are just like kind of like I'm like it's like the bell is still ringing and like, like it's like still reverberating. I do want to say I thank you for naming that again, like kind of where collapse shows up. And like I think that there like I do believe that there is like, you know, and I think a lot of science has even supported that there are like deep ancestral connections of kind of like the co-evolution of humans with different plants and mushrooms. And you know, you mentioned like in safe and connected environments to be a place where you can be, you know, of communing in this church of plant medicines, and also naming that like for a lot of people maybe that isn't the case, and like their survival is hinging on, you know, perhaps using that, maybe they don't have the safe connected environment. And I know our teacher Carmen has talked about like the rat studies, you know, where the rats um will only like become addicted to like the I think it's heroin or whatever, like in their water if they're like have to live in a cage. But if they're actually given like rat city and are just able to live a life as rats, like they don't drink from the heroin water at any like discernible rate greater than just the normal water. So like so I really appreciate that you named that, like there's definitely a problem, and like the problem isn't like the drug use itself, but like the environment that we are in that is making it that like the last little shred of, you know, joy or enchantment with the world is, you know, for some, you know, for perhaps some people is through their, maybe the only community they actually have is with that plant medicine. Do you want to speak more to how you have cultivated safe, connected environments? You know, what's the ambiance of this church? What does you know, what does Sunday worship look like, and who's all there, human or otherwise?
Oh, yeah. I want to answer that question because it's a good one. And as I hear what you're saying, what is coming to me is this concept of compassionate witnessing, and how there are those of us who are working with plants in ways to hopefully break free of the cage. And there are those of us who are working with plants to survive being in the cage.
Right.
And I would hope, I'd like to believe that there's an empathy available to all the species involved to sort of know, like, yeah, like, you know, I'm thinking about somebody who might use cannabis to self-medicate and going like, yeah, like, you know, I would like to hope and believe that not the over, but the meta spirit of cannabis understands that there are those of us who are surviving being in the cage. There are those of us who are trying to get out of it. And there are those of us who are, you know, titrating between that constantly, right?
Yeah.
Being in, just about to get out, staying out for a little while, and then falling back in again. Like the cage is made of really, really spiky material in the world that we live in right now. And so, yeah, I just wanted to offer that a little bit. I don't know for what it's worth, but and part of that is because I think I'm getting a little bit distracted by this concept of consent.
Oh yeah.
And so the second question you asked, or the question you just asked me around, you know, what does connecting with plant medicine energy look like when there is a feeling of safety and when we can create containers of safety around it? And so consent feels like an important place to start. And I've noticed I'm a bit distracted in my mind about how much of the cannabis industry, for example, is rooted in patriarchy, and how little consent there is between us and the plant world right now, generally, like humans in the plant world right now. And so, in terms of creating environments and situations and circumstances in which communing with plant energies and plant medicines, or psychedelics maybe more broadly, for those who are working with other psychedelics that maybe aren't super plant-based anymore, or, et cetera, is, asking that question of the plants, of the medicine. I'm thinking a little bit about the practice that we do in the Numinous Network of calling in competent protectors and allies and guides, right? So if we're working with plants and we're open to the possibility that those plants have agency and that those plants have spirit and that they too have been mutually evolving and adjusting towards working with us in ways that will help us break out of the cage or survive being in the cage, then we can, from there, we can ask the plants, how does it feel to enter into this relationship with me? So, for the benefit of the listeners, something that I have been doing for a number of years now is seasonally sitting with psilocybin and doing what I would call psilocybin medicine sits, where a group of trusted sisters and friends gather and ask psilocybin to join our circle and support us to do our work in the world and to, access the information that we need to stay whole in the world. And one of the things that we do to create safety there is we bring in consent as an important aspect of the relationship, not only with the medicine that we're taking, but with each other, right? Are we all here consenting to this? And that can take some discernment, right? Because who doesn't just want to escape,
right,
and get away, and who doesn't really hope for a positive, uplifting, empowering experience? But the reality is that sometimes what shows up when we are in these medicines needs tending, needs care, feels collapsy, feels, and so we all need to be there. We're entering into this relationship of consent to say, I consent to this experience, which means I will take care of it and tend to it along the way. And the other piece, consent naturally leads to this concept of safety, right? What are the conditions of safety that would allow me to consent to this experience and would allow you to consent to this experience? You being cannabis, you being psilocybin, you being the people or the environment in which I'm going to do this work. We must ask, like, what would create conditions of safety for this? And so that's everything from, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional safety. How will we know how to address what shows up in the medicine? Because sometimes, given that we are in a world that has a lot of suffering and pain in it, sometimes that comes up and shows through. And so, creating safety isn't just about making sure that all the conditions are perfect so that when we take our medicines, we get like the most bright, happy, love and light experience, but that we have the capacity to show up to what emerges that may need a lot of care and attention.
Right.
And one of the ways that I like to do that is to, pre-practice what are the things that we're going to do if something is getting it's something starting to feel unsafe, right? Whatever's happening to me. And so it's about asking those questions, like, and maybe I'll just give it a little example here, but I was in a sit with some beloveds, and somebody in the circle was feeling a very strong need to convulse.
Mm.
And so their body was tremoring and trembling and kind of shaking, and there was a lot of energy moving through their body, and it was very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And the question we asked, together was like, what feels safest to try and have like a weighted sort of feeling around you, to be sort of held in a way that could allow some of the shaking to stop, or to shake it through and let it out? Is this something that's asking to happen and needs to be released? And how do you know? Like, how do you know, right? And so, yeah, there's always a risk. There's lots of risk involved in entering into relationships with plant spirits and plant medicine when we don't have a lot of like the it's not in our normal day-to-day lives to have all the teachings and wisdoms necessary to do so. A lot of us are like making this up as we go,
I
right?
know, yeah.
And even when you go online to try and find, or if you go out into the world to try and access good teaching information about how to be in good relationship with plant medicines, there's a lot of extractive, predatory information out there as well. So yeah, sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place here. Sorry about that.
No, no, thank you. I feel like in my experience with psilocybin, which isn't vast, but I feel like that one is, like you said, it's way more unpredictable than cannabis. It's like I've yet to engage with psilocybin and not like have just a really deep cry about collapse and mortality, and which is so, like, the fact that there are people out there that would do psilocybin as like a to amplify like a celebratory or party, like it's just like I am like, that is so like outside of the realm of that's outside of my consent. Like I would not like those two things would just and being really, for me, I know being really careful about like who I would be with, and like you said, like really setting the like, yeah, how are we gonna create as much safeness here, but still recognizing that, like, to have the expectation that it's all gonna be like love and light and rainbows and butterflies um pushing your own agenda or your own narrative, as opposed to being like, if you truly are like, I'm engaging with you as a guide, and what is it that what is it you want to tell me? What is it you want to show me? What is it you want to feel through me? Or and then when you talk about that, like the way these medicines, I keep calling them medicines, but even that is putting them in relationship to how we, like you said, fucking use them. So I just want to name myself right here that I'm normalizing them as what can they do for me, as opposed to like them in their own spiritual sovereignty as just like a part of my ecosystem, whether I ingest them ever or not. Which is making me think a little bit about like, I met with an herbalist a while back. Maybe I'll have her on the pod have them on the pod sometime. They recommended a book to me, and now I forget the name of the book. The path of the poison plants, or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Dale Pendell or something like that is pharmacopoeia. I will find it and put it in the show notes. But cannabis was classified as a camp follower, and there wasn't much written about cannabis in this book that I recall, or maybe rather the part that I remember the most is that it was saying that, like, it's always showing up in the wake of the destruction left by human, like, encampments. Like if people are going around, like it's in, like,
disturbed.
Yes, the disturbed landscapes. And so that makes me think of, like how we have this really short-sighted relationship with plants. It's like, this is an invasive species, but like from an ecological perspective, like, okay, they are growing within this disturbance, but they're actually serving a greater ecological role. And okay, so we want to plant natives and harvest invasives, or, like, it's like, okay, we don't want to encourage the invasives to continue, but we can actually, anyway, so that's another door I can walk down a later time. But what I also really liked about, and I think maybe it's what even informed why the stoner question is, how do you connect with your most wild self? Because what really got to me was how they say that even cannabis plants that have been cultivated and like tried to be, bred for a certain, phenotype or whatever, can just like that become rewilded. Like they're actually like their ability to just like kind of evade domestication and just go right back to like some sort of like wild. Okay, and I see you're looking a little bit excited. Anyway, that is like a big segue into. I just remember a while back you mentioned how like the marijuana industry itself is like very patriarchal. I'll let you respond to whatever maybe you wanted to say, but I wanted to make sure that like cannabis is marijuana, hemp, whatever, like that their story is told a little bit today as you see it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So, oh my gosh. Okay. So I feel like it'd be useful to put a little bit of context around this, which is that my spouse and I met around 2006 or 7, and he had been farming hemp for a year with this idea that hemp had a huge capacity to transform agriculture, to transform the world. Hemp as a plant is what traditionally humans have used to make rope out of and cloth. It's also a really great food source, depending on what cannabis you're growing. Hemp is a member of the cannabis family. Honestly, like I don't really buy into the current world's way of talking about cannabis. So
yeah, fair.
but I also haven't developed the language that like fully resonates either. But, for the listeners' benefit, if hemp is the family member of the cannabis family that doesn't have any THC in it, that is not psychedelic, does not, alter consciousness, but rather is grown for its material, which is either the stock for making clothing and for the seeds, which have protein, hemp hearts in them, and really important omegas and oils and micronutrients and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, started growing hemp with my spouse, and over the years we've had a lot, like our life journey has very much been intertwined with the hemp plant, because we have made a livelihood off of growing it, but also through growing hemp is how I came to be somebody who gardens a lot and has gardened in such a way that I would call it like intuitive gardening, where I'm accessing my gardening skills through what the plants are telling me, not through what books and science and plant courses and gardening courses are telling me. And over the years, as I was working with my spouse in the sort of farming hemp agricultural space, we started off growing huge tracts of land in Saskatchewan, and now we grow like a little craft plot outside our door, and that produces a farm income for us. And when I think about hemp, what not so much when I think about it, scrap that. When I feel into hemp, and when I feel into cannabis is interesting to me because it does have a sex. There are male cannabis plants and female cannabis plants. So the male cannabis plants have the parts that pollinate, that fertilize, or sorry, fertilize, and then the female plant, if its flowers are, if the pollen and sort of the basically like, if the male plants are allowed to reach their full maturity, they secrete or release, the pollen that then fertilizes the female plants. And then those female plants will grow to produce like hemp hearts. So instead of just flowering, they will actually produce seeds, and then those seeds become food. And what the cannabis industry has done is it has grown cannabis that does have THC in it in such a way as that the male plants are basically like destroyed or not allowed to grow, or even like, female plants are cloned and that kind of thing. And it's the female plants when they flower, but have not been germinated, have not been fertilized, have not been allowed to kind of complete their full life cycle, that they're staying in their flower state, that's the flower, the bud that becomes the consumable cannabis that we use, to access the plant medicine energy or the plant spirit energy of cannabis. And so, just by saying all of that, if you just throw in the word patriarchy, you can see where the problem is, right? Like the cannabis industry is taking a female or feminine or feminized plant and preventing it from
aging,
preventing it from reaching its seed state, preventing for reaching its full potential, so that we can access the blooming part, the flowering part, because the bloom and the flower is always the most valuable, and actually connects to sort of other teachings I have, or teachings that plants have shared with me about how like plants don't only want to be seen as beautiful when they're blooming.
Right.
Like the full cycle of the plant life is important and necessary and powerful and potent, and it has medicine in it. Anyway, so obviously cannabis medicine comes from the flower, and the cannabis industry seriously controls the feminine, like the plant energy, the spirit, and the potency of the cannabis species, the cannabis plant. And so it can be really challenging to enter into a consensual relationship with cannabis if you don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
And even when that's the case and we don't know where it came from, if we assume that it's possible that how that cannabis has come into our lives is through means and mechanisms that don't feel right, similar to like when we eat factory farm meat, or food that has been grown in fields that are harvested by people who are not having their rights upheld.
Right.
There's like when you think about it while you're consuming it, there's like a feeling that comes up that you have to contend with. But at the same time, then what we can do when we're consuming it, if we don't know its origin story, is we can enter into a loving, kind, grateful relationship and say, given that the circumstances with which you came to me may not be ideal, how can I then enter into a consensual, healing, whole, fair, honest relationship with you?
Yeah. Yeah, that like reminds me of, again, on the Numinous Network, we have like the land acknowledgement before, like all the live events of just like, can we be in a conversation with the land of, what identities do you hold here and how do we be here in a good way? And like, it's an invitation to grapple. And I just think like, there's just so many invitations to grapple. And what I'm hearing is like, oh my gosh, like, okay, even if it's just like, okay, I don't necessarily know like the full, like who farmed this, but like, can I at least take a pause and say a prayer, or, just be like, okay, given that we live in collapse, given that we live at late stage capitalism at the end of empire, and like perfection is a myth, and like there's only trade-offs, no, there's
only predicaments.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, but like I can at least just, like name it, take a pause, like feel into whatever it might make me feel, even if it's a little bit not fun to maybe, and then just be like, okay, like, and, and thank you, and just like being, yeah.
Well, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, about, there are those who access plant medicines or other medicines. There's a lot of us self-medicating out there.
Yeah.
And you said something earlier about how like all it takes is a tiny shift and a plant will rewild itself. And all it takes is a tiny little, opening, a little crack in the wall, like you said, to start seeing things differently. And if all it takes is a little crack in the wall, a little opening, a little disturbance to allow a plant or a person or an entity to have a micro shift that allows us to see things just a little bit differently, right? That like ability to shift consciousness at will, then the circumstances do not always have to be perfect for us to have a perfect experience. Like, I'm just trying to normalize too. I guess I would be concerned that anybody listening to this is having any kind of like, I do this all the time. I'm constantly questioning, like, am I doing it right?
Yes.
Am I getting it right? Oh gosh. Oh no. Have I been doing it wrong all along? Like, I'm really mindful to sort of want to normalize that we're all making it up as we go. That because of the rift that has been developed through extractive capitalist colonial capitalism between ourselves and the more than human world, reestablishing that relationship, it takes vulnerability. It takes a willingness to fumble. It takes a willingness to grapple, just as you said. And so, maybe that is what is so amazing about the plant world, is that it is such an incredible source of potentiality. Like, if you are feeling despair about the world and then you go out into a disturbed patch of land and you look at what's trying to grow there, it instantly, at least for me, fills me with this recognition that, like, no matter how bad it gets, something is going to emerge from the rubble. Something is going to try and live. And that thing, whatever it may be, whatever species it may come from, it has an agency that is compelling itself forward. And when we work with plants, we get to access that in ways that I think do help rewild us. And, I guess if there was sort of something that if I were to become somebody who just spent my entire time advocating, which, isn't in my life right now, but if I could choose to spend every waking hour sort of sharing a message with the world, I think it would be like if we could return to being in kinship with the plant world, more consistently across the world, we would be able to access different tools and skills and strategies for surviving collapse, but we would also be accessing tools and skills and strategies for imagining a different world.
Right. I really like the idea of just, like every time you're in a practice with a plant, like what is it in practice? What is it a practice of, or what is it in service to? And so if it's like, okay, like this is a crack in the wall, or even if it is like, if every single time I'm going to commune with a plant medicine, it's to just be in this grappling question of like, how do I be here in a good way? Or like, given that I don't know the full history here and that I have this power over this plant medicine, like how is that going to change how you arrive in all your other interactions, right? Like, how is that like a somatic practice that you're just like building up the like, so I think I'm just like still kind of luxuriating in that. And then also just something you said where it's like, I really appreciate the care that you're putting out there for the listeners. And I think I resonate with that too, that I could listen to this episode and just be like, oh my gosh, this means that like my only means of survival of, of these systems. And if I don't know where I'm getting my, then it means I have to stop, and it's just like, hey, actually, like it's like, you are not the problem. It's capital, like it's capitalism, it's colonial. It's just like how I can't commune with my wildness by going outside because there is no actual like nature I can connect with. It's only gas stations and whatever. So I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to picture the feather and the rock in my hand, or, and it's like, it like, thank goodness it is accessible. Thank goodness it is a lifeline. Thank goodness it is a practice of potentially connecting to, for me, it's an invitation to wildness. and seeing the cracks in the walls. And if it is, and if it's the only thing keeping you alive, you know, we're not saying that there, again, there's no purity or perfection, but it's like,
Mhm.
just can we at least be like, I am so like, I'm sorry that, you know, or that I just, you know, there's even like, even just naming the want, like, I wish that I could be in closer proximity to where you came from, or, you know, like just
Mhm.
to just even open up the conversation of like, what's the spirit or guide that's behind this, and just if it were a friend, how would you invite that friend over? You know,
Mhm.
what would be your prayer? What would be your gratitude if there were a friend that came over and gave you the experience that cannabis gives you, or any, you know, or any plant relationship. That feels really profound. Kirsten.
And and like what would happen? What could happen if, along with accessing plant medicines, plant energies for our benefit, and along with accessing them just for our basic coping, what might happen, what could be possible if we entered into and opened up that little question of like, okay, friend, what
Mm-hmm.
would you have me know this time?
Yes. Yes. Be just asking a question and just like seeing what
Yeah.
comes and proceeding as though, because that's
Mm-hmm.
like half the magic, right? It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
just proceed as though like what comes next is from them.
And when I've asked that question of cannabis before, often what I hear back is like, oh, get into your body, girl.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take a beat,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah, it's
have
never
a,
go faster.
yeah. Uh, um, I, psilocybin you mentioned, super collapsy, right? Like it's a medicine that comes from the decay of the world.
Exactly.
Like it's a medicine that comes from like the death
Compost and yeah,
and
death.
compost, yeah, and the
Mm-hmm.
dark places. And I remember being I remember sort of entering into a psilocybin sit with some friends on the land where I live, and there's this beautiful arbutus tree who grows right in the sort of the center of the property where we live. And I feel a lot of gratitude for the previous people who've lived here for letting, for really allowing that arbutus to claim its space. Because it's like right next to the house. It's just right outside my door here. And it's not doing so good. It's had some challenging life experiences. There's
Mm.
been fences, nailed into it that we've pulled out, and lots of rubble around it that we've cleared out since being here. But I remember sort of, you know, almost like white savior energy going up to this arbutus
Oh,
tree while I was in psilocybin, being like, what can I do to help you thrive? Like, I'm so sorry that you're suffering and struggling. And arbutus was like, just, just let me be.
just
Just I, don't only love me if I'm thriving. Don't only love me and think I'm doing, like, don't
mm,
only appreciate me and see my value for when I'm, you know, really
mm,
shiny and really rocking it. Like I'm, I've lived through it all at this point. And
yeah,
like the dying parts of me and the fungal parts of me and the bark that's falling off and the parts of me that are suffering and struggling, like they are part of me. Take all of me, like see it
mm-hmm,
all, love me for all of it. And what a beautiful thing to happen when you're in psilocybin, because then the invitation is to go, okay, well, if Arbutus is asking to be seen in their wholeness and through their suffering, then don't I also want to be seen in my
yeah,
wholeness and through my suffering? And can I not also love myself and all those parts of me and not always expect myself to be thriving either?
right. Yeah, like grappling with just kind of like this ableist programming of, yeah, like ableist and ageist, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just like, oh,
Healthist,
don't
is that what Sophie Strand
healthist.
calls it?
Oh, yeah,
Healthist, yeah.
healthism. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, actually, body as a doorway definitely came to mind. Also want to just name that you mentioned that you have like so many stories of things that plants have told you, and I just felt like such like a juiciness at the like possibility of maybe like you coming back on the podcast and sharing more more wisdom from the plants, because it helps. I mean, you say what resources you for collective liberation is like reminding people to be in love with the world, reminding your son specifically like to be in love with the world. And I just want to name that like you have helped me practice and gain like some, I don't like the gain muscle, but like gain some skillfulness in landing joy and enchantment. And a big avenue of that is through how you talk about your different plant friends. And so I don't necessarily like, I know we are at time, and I just kind of want to, I'm just like reaching into the future that I would love to have you back on the podcast to talk more. Because I'm not feeling a disappointment at all we didn't talk about, because we talked about a lot, and I'm really grateful for the conversation we had. And I'm also yearning for like more when the time aligns for us.
Absolutely. I feel like something has, I don't know, it's like an on button. There's been a switch of an on button for me. I think I was saying when you and I first talked before we pressed record, like I'm actually severely depleted right now. I've had a really demanding few months, and I notice myself just even as we have this conversation, feeling like I'm kind of coming back, out like, and that's something that I would love to talk about more too, because often what I do when I am noticing that I'm feeling something other than, maybe what we would call able, right? Like often when I'm not feeling like I have the energy to cope with the circumstances of my life and the demands of my life, and there's that feeling of whatever it is, exhaustion or depression or low mood or whatever that is, I'll often look to the plant world, not because I'm hoping or expecting that it can trigger me back into joy, because I actually think of joy as being able to grapple with the suffering while noticing the beauty. I really don't think of joy as like a happiness project at all. And I think of it as an existence project. But like when I look to the plant world and I'm feeling like I need to fall apart, the plant world tells me that like the necessary element of the bloom is also to like fall apart and rest, at periods of rest, right? There is no flower out there that is always blooming. Like, exactly. Right. And so, or, if I'm struggling, if I'm feeling really spicy and like what I really want to do is sort of scream or get a little bit, well, sometimes I can feel like I want to be kind of harsh, right? Like shaking the shoulders of the universe, being like, what is going on here? Yes. Yeah. Like, it's just a matter of looking out again at the plant world and going like there's plants that have thorns, there's plants that have toxins, there's plants that are specifically in the world with destructive energies, and these energies of trying to be either protective or regenerative. Like there's always something available from the plant world to help me navigate the state that I'm in, that helps bring me back into joy. If by what I mean by joy is a remembrance that like the totality of it all, the full picture of, the moment we emerge in this world to when we become an ancestor, that all of it is the project of existence. And the joy comes from being like, oh, and here is my moment in it.
Like the feather. I'll just take a moment here to ask if there's anything you just wanted to mention about like just promoting, or if anybody has really enjoyed hearing from you in today's episode, where could they, follow you on social or connect with your work, any work in the world you might want to share.
Aw, thanks. Yeah. I love being on this podcast and just generally having conversations like this. And it often has me wondering, like, what is my offering and service to the world? And the reality is that, I'm not an entrepreneur at this time. And, I'm mostly just living my life, and I enjoy the opportunity to talk about that.
Totally.
But I do have an Instagram account. It's called Tending Nettles. And, that's a reference to a lot of the teachings of plants for me. Like when the nettle patch is full of sting, and, I purposefully use it on my skin to help. Like I touch myself, like I allow my body to get touched by nettle, and it does sting and it does hurt, but it also totally relieves the inner pain, like the arthritis in my wrists and stuff like that. So Tending Nettles is all about like tending to the sting of life through like enchantment. And then we also have a website called thegoodseedland.com. I think, maybe just double check that. I don't even know my website all that much, but and it's where we sell some of the things that we grow on the farm, or some of the plants that grow here on this little rental farm where we live. And that includes different seeds of plants that we hope are either, healing or produce food to survive collapse, like things that last the winter and are easy to store or easy to preserve. And in the case of my husband, who is really interested in Indigenous food sovereignty, seeds that have been cultivated over the generations, and that we're trying to make sure their heritage continues on. And I often think of like seeds as being my inheritance, or our family's inheritance, seeds and plants. Like, I don't have excess cash to give. We're almost a single income family. I have a day job. That's what pays for our lifestyle. And then we grow things on the land, and my husband primarily does most of that. And that's how we kind of afford this lifestyle. And where was I going with that? Just that, like, this concept of sort of passing your kids down land or massive amounts of money is pretty much beyond our reach at this point, under the current circumstances. And so I often think of like the lineages that I carry forward, or the things that will be around when I become an ancestor, are the plant genetics and the seeds that I tended to throughout my lifetime. And so if you want some of those seeds, you can go on to Good Seed Land and check it out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of that. It actually felt really beautiful to hear you talk about your Instagram handle here on like this particular episode about plants, and then talking about your seeds and stuff. So I hope that people can check you out. And thank you so much for coming on my show, Kirsten. Until next time.
Thanks, Kristyn.
I want to thank Matt Shuby for the podcast art, my husband Kevin Carlo for all his help in the creation of the theme song for the podcast, and Anais Mitchell and John Williams for their inspiration of Hedwig's theme and Hadestown. And before I sign off, I would like to leave you with a quote from another one of my teachers, Rev Angel Kyoto Williams, who says, "Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters."